In the grim darkness of the far future, many horrors await humanity among the stars. Tyranids, driven by a ravenous hive mind, heretic Astartes and their demonic hordes, and so much more lurk within the shadows, wanting nothing more than to snuff out the light of the Imperium. But one of these threats is just as, if not more, terrifying than hungry bugs and prideful traitors. They can appear in a flash and vanish just as quickly as they came. They only inhabit our corporeal dimension for a short time, but in that time, they can unleash death and suffering that even the most bloodthirsty chaos demon can only dream of. These hyper-sadomasochists are known as the Drukhari, twisted renditions of the graceful and restrained Eldar who, after the apocalyptic birth of Slaanesh that almost ended in their extinction, chose not to leave behind the life of hedonism that caused such a calamity, but to embrace it with their very souls. 10,000 Terran years ago, the once great Eldari Empire completely collapsed amidst the awakening of the fourth Chaos God, Slaanesh. Slaanesh was an entity born of the Eldar's boredom in a perfect society, leading them to pursue the maximum levels of thrills, pleasure, and all manner of sensations. These emotions, experienced by the highly evolved Eldar psyche in ways inconceivable to humans, eventually coalesced into the Prince of Pleasure and Excess itself, and the newborn god consumed the souls of billions of Eldari. While a great many Eldari foresaw the coming collapse and either fled to start new settlements or avoid the massive craft world vessels, many did not. It was those Eldari that put the nail in the coffin of their great empire, founding pleasure cults that pursued ever more depraved and violent desires. They hunted each other in the streets for sport, flayed each other alive in fits of both agony and pleasure, and more unspeakable things. Survivors of the end times were either on the far-flung Exodite colonies, aboard craft worlds, or had fled to or had presently been in the strange side dimension known as the Webway, a place untouched by the warp, and that those with the know-how to access could remain safe from the infernal gluttony of Slaanesh. Though they escaped instant death or madness from having their souls ripped into the warp by the new god, their psychic energy still leaked into it, which, upon their deaths, would still lead to their souls being consumed by Slaanesh. But the Webway elves discovered that as long as they ensured that others suffered in their place, they could prevent themselves from being consumed. They inflicted the most evil and savage acts upon others, the psychic energy of their victims nourishing their souls and ensuring they remain strong and untouched by she who thirsts. Provided they could do this enough, they could use this psychic energy to essentially develop immortality and prevent themselves from falling prey to the dreaded Prince of Pleasure. Thus, the Drukari were born. The Drukari view their craft world cousins as cowards for abandoning what they believe to be the only true and effective way to escape Slaanesh's clutches, and that the Drukari are the true heirs of the fallen empire. They're tall, thin, and in peak physical condition. In combat, they move with a speed and brutal grace other races can only dream of, and they are masters of the martial arts. Like all Eldar, their senses are far sharper than mortals, but even more so than the Asuryani craft worlders. It's said that they can see in pitch blackness, hear your heart beating as you hide behind a bulkhead, and even taste your fear in the air as they mercilessly stalk and toy with you to satisfy their selfish and disgusting urges. Yet there's one key difference between the Dark Elves and the Craft Worlders. In order to further reduce the influence Slaanesh has upon them, the Drukari have essentially muted their psychic abilities. Using one's innate psychic powers is one of the very few things forbidden by Drukari culture, and the punishment for using them is unimaginably gruesome and cruel. Their technology to most other races seems almost arcane. Such is their level of technological advancement, which has turned killing into an art form. Even their armor is covered in bladed edges to give themselves another weapon to use against their enemies. And the Drukari of the Webway have perfected the art of killing to inflict the most suffering and pain possible. Splinter rifles set nervous systems aflame with pain. Their whips are covered in acid, and beams of dark light streak from cannons that annihilate targets in a single shot. But the act of killing isn't the only thing that drives the Drukari. The terror they wrought upon their victims is equally as sweet. Thanks to their mastery of the Webway, the Drukari can appear anywhere at any time. They strike from sleek grav barges, firing down into enemy formations, blasting them apart as they silently soar over a battlefield, popping in and out of real space on a whim. After causing death and despair from above, The Drukari take to the ground and resort to their sports of torture with the unfortunate survivors. They take their time, savoring every scream and tear shed. When the toys become too broken to provide entertainment, they're sometimes granted the release of death, but far too often, they're fashioned into foul pieces of jewelry or even furniture, and are kept alive through arcane and forbidden methods so that they can experience their new horror for a little bit longer. While the Drukari regularly conduct these raids, they do not do so lightly. Each is meticulously planned and plotted to ensure they reap the maximum reward and minimize losses. The lucky ones they don't kill are claimed as slaves and taken back to the dark city of Commorragh in the Webway, so they may have their souls harvested in place of their masters. And while every Dark Elf is an ambitious and selfish creature, they know collectively that by working together to harvest the souls of the other races of the galaxy, their kind will continue to survive and thrive free from the jaws of Slaanesh. A steady supply of souls ensures that the Drukari can stave off the effects of aging, effectively achieving immortality. Yet, Slaanesh still leeches bits of their souls from them throughout their lives. Drinking the psychic energies from their victims seems to restore those parts of them that are lost and sate Slaanesh at the same time. Regardless, the Drukari are a dying species. Naturally born infants are a rarity due to the long term of Eldari pregnancy, so the Drukari have resorted to IVF and cloning to replenish their numbers. This has led to Drukari society being divided into two social castes, trueborns and halfborns. Trueborns are those who enter the world naturally, often from the upper echelons of Drukari nobility. These valuable few see themselves as a cut above the majority of the Drukari, who are essentially test tube babies. They tend to stay amongst their own and use the halfborn as slave laborers, though it's not uncommon for halfborn to climb the social ladder and establish a place for themselves among the upper class. These trueborns comprise the elite Kabbalite warrior squads that possess far better war gear than their half-born brothers, and act as their Archons' most elite unit and faithful bodyguards. These Archons are the leaders of the Drukari, the best of the best. They attain their position not just through their mastery of combat, but through their mastery of the political game as well, constantly staving off assassination attempts from their rivals and closest ally. The Archon possesses the authority and power to order the enslavement of entire worlds. But the Archon suffers a curse that their underlings are unfamiliar with: desensitization. Thousands of years of gorging on the terror and pain of others have left the Archons with barely any ability to satisfy their own bloodlust. Only the most horrific atrocities can satiate them. They regularly lead full-scale invasions of the material realm and have thousands of slaves sacrificed to them in addition each day in an attempt to hold off the degeneration of themselves and their souls. The Archons will eventually begin to age, however, and become physically corrupted as more and more souls are needed to rejuvenate themselves, leading them to craft death masks to hide their increasingly grotesque faces. Most Drukari will eventually face this conundrum as they age, but there is a major exception, and that is the Homunculi. The Lords of Pain are the true masters of Drukari regeneration, and also the true masters of the esoteric torture methods their kind has developed over the millennia. Covens of these individuals are feared even among the Drukari, for they can not only sculpt the flesh, but also the soul. They themselves are twisted amalgamations of flesh and modification that barely resemble the elegant elven forms the rest of their kind possess, and are some of the oldest of their species, with some even reportedly being the creators of the very first pleasure cults of the ancient Eldar Empire. Some homunculi slither across the ground like vile serpents. Others float through the air with anti-grav crystals, but all showcase the absolute extreme of the Drukari. Some replace their blood with acid, others suspend their heart, lungs, and intestines in macabre contraptions suspended over their shoulders and are constantly injected with stimulants. But short of conducting works related to their craft of flesh sculpting and torture, homunculi shy away from even the most basic of labor or extra duties. Instead, they use entities called racks. Racks are Drukari who willingly submit themselves to the service of homunculi by requesting themselves to be transformed into something different than they were born as. This voluntary metamorphosis transforms the Drukari into something wretched, allowing them to experience entirely new sensations of pain and pleasure that they normally otherwise would never get to experience. These people are often found to be grafted with multiple arms, usually from different species, and are privy to excess bone growths, which allow them to hang multiple tools of torture for use by themselves or their master. In short, some real Hellraiser type shit. Most of these denizens and the horrific acts they commit reside in the massive dark city of Commorragh. The center of Drukari society, Commorragh was once the greatest of the Eldari webway settlements. Growing over the centuries as the Dark Eldar plundered the outer settlements of the webway and brought back thousands of slaves from the material plane, Commorragh and its dark spires are home to the most depraved pleasure cults that can trace their origins back to before the fall. In the days of the Empire, Commorragh already existed, but beyond the means of Eldari authority. And so the pleasure cults who saw the doom on the horizon retreated here to survive She Who Thirsts, and cling on to their twisted and dark souls for just a while longer. Within Commorragh, the favorite pastime of the Dark Elves is gladiatorial combat, often led by the various witch cults. The fighting pits of Commorragh are a place for the blade mistresses of the succubi to show off their powers to an awe-inspired crowd. This bride of death is revered among every Drukari, for even the most casual displays of violence are done with such grace and form that each kill is, in of itself, an act of showmanship. One of the main reasons for these gladiatorial displays is to keep the peace. The population of Commorragh would love nothing more than to indulge their savage desires upon one another, but they also know that this would lead to their ultimate ruin. So, the masses gather to watch the witch cults put on their grim ballerina shows so that large numbers of Drukari can, in a way, feast together upon the agony of the slaves chosen to be combatants. Each witch cult has its own arena, and each one is unique, filled with all sorts of arcane tricks and traps. The spectacles taking place here always end in these glorious structures being soaked in blood and gore, as well as their spectators. Zero-gravity massacres overhead rain showers of blood upon the manic crowds below. Fights even take place among the stands so that the psychically starved Drukari can experience the pains and pleasures of battle without actually being in it themselves. The witch cults are second only to the Archons who sponsor them, and their relationship is mutually beneficial. The Archons provide the witches with slaves and drugs, and the witches provide the Archons with exceptional and loyal warriors to aid his raids on real space, with each cult specializing in certain aspects of the kill. One cult might specialize in bladed combat, while another in poisons, for example. Each cult is led by a succubus, an exceedingly beautiful female warrior who's an absolute master of her craft. For the succubus, the act of killing is more akin to an act of worship to oneself. They're constantly in competition with other succubi, and always strive to perfect not only their art, but also their bodies, taking immense pride in what they do and all the training that they undertake. But succubi who obtain one too many scars, or don't make their performances aesthetic enough for the audience, often find themselves suddenly facing impossible odds that even a warrior of their caliber cannot overcome, showing just how vain the Drukari are in their pursuit of hedonistic perfection. And that's all for this one, folks. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below, and let me know what other spooky Warhammer stuff you want to hear about. It is spooky season after all, so I'm going to be doing videos this month centered around that. As always, drop a like if you like it, a subscribe if you really liked it, check out my community tab for shitposts and shenanigans, and I'll see you all in the next one. Toodles.